Thank you. Yes, I come from the University of Oslo, Department of Chemistry, and I want to talk to you about hydrogen from renewable energy. Why it's interesting. I want to convince you it's interesting. I want to convince you that it's necessary for our future. And then I want to ask the question and try to answer whether or not it will be a big business or if it already is. So let's go back 140 years to Jules Verne. He had this quote from his book, The Mysterious Island, in 1874. I'm not going to read it for you, but he basically envisioned a future where hydrogen was used as an energy carrier created from water, and that would be the way to move our energy landscape into the future. And if you know your literature history, you know that basically everything Jules Verne predicted has happened. So that's a good omen for us. And his vision is basically the use of hydrogen as an energy carrier. It's the transition of water, which has low energy, through the use of solar energy, excess wind, any energy source you have that is extra, and you create oxygen and hydrogen. This can be stored and later transformed by reaction of oxygen into energy again with water as the byproduct. So it's a quite elegant circle of energy which has no emissions and is technically the way to move, one way to move into a completely renewable future. And if we also look into the history of hydrogen technologies, I'm not going to go through the details again, but you see we started in the 1800s where fuel cells, the way we use or produce electricity from hydrogen, and electrolysis, which is our way of producing hydrogen, they were both discovered in the 1800s. Then we had industrialization of electrolysis in 1900, but it had to go all the way up to the 60s until the Apollo missions used fuel cells for the first time. And now, as was mentioned, hydrogen cars are reaching the market. But an interesting note here is that since the initial industrial electrolysis was first developed, nothing has really happened over the last 100 years. The polymer electrolysis has been discovered, it's been studied, but it hasn't really reached the market. So industrially, we're still using the same technology, which is also installed by Norsk Hydro in Vemork, for instance. So nothing's really happened in terms of commercialization of hydrogen production. And the reason is quite easy, or simple. It's basically, we have a lot of fossil fuels. They are cost competitive on a large scale, and it can be easily and quite efficiently converted into hydrogen. The problem, of course, is that you also get CO2. So it's not a very clean way of producing hydrogen, and as we know, it's not really a way into the future, because we will get fewer of these, and we also want less of this. But it hasn't really been any economic incentive into driving the development of renewable hydrogen production. But that's changing, as was also mentioned in the introduction. Things are changing because we are projecting a large increase in the share of renewables. We want to limit the use of fossil fuels. And as we're now increasing the amount of renewable energy, we have some challenges. In Germany, they have now above 25%. And when you have energy sources such as wind and solar, they're intermittent in their nature. They vary from day to day. They vary from hour to hour. They vary from summer to winter. So you need to store it because our consumption doesn't match the energy production. So we need a way to store it. For instance, from a sunny day to a dark night, or from hour to hour on a short-term basis, you need to balance the power harvesting to the consumption. This can be done by batteries, high-power batteries, high-power supercapacitors, smart grids, which we'll be hearing about later today. And they need to be fast reacting, meaning that they can respond quickly to changes, and that they have to have a high efficiency. But we also have more long-term storage necessities. Like you can envision a long summer where we have a lot of sun, a lot of energy production, harvesting. That needs to be stored for the winter when the solar energy is much lower. We can't produce as much solar during the winter. Other seasonal variations also occur in terms of wind. And then you can envision then if you have an overproduction, each day. You need a very large amount of batteries if you want to store in batteries, for instance, or other types. So batteries are not necessarily viable for those large amounts of energy. Then it's more because the resource here is actually the lithium ions. You're storing basically each electron in a lithium ion. And we know that lithium is a resource which is scarce. We don't have as much of it. Then you can rather envision that you can use water, which we have plentiful of, as long as we at least can use seawater. Then we know we've got plenty. Convert it to hydrogen and store it in tanks. So then basically our storage medium is a tank, or it's a salt cavern in the Earth's crust. So the concept here is that the production of energy is the same, but you actually have to store, let's say, 2 months worth of energy, and then the storage is actually the cost. But storage of hydrogen is actually not as expensive and cost-driving as for batteries. So then the lowered efficiency, because the efficiency of hydrogen production is lower than batteries, is not as big of a concern, because it is the storage itself which is cost-driving in these large energy systems. Another important factor here is also the concept of renewable energy is not necessarily the resource for renewable energy isn't necessarily highest where we want to use it. If you look at solar intensity, deserts have quite a lot of sun, but you don't have a lot of consumers in the deserts. You got a lot of wind offshore. But there's not that many industrial plants offshore. So where the energy is, where you have the most amount of energy, you don't necessarily have the consumption. So you want to harvest the energy where you have a lot of it, convert it, store it, and then transport it to where it's consumed. And then converting water into hydrogen, which can be stored and transported, is a very viable option. So here again, hydrogen from water will save the globe. There's just one little caveat, and that's the problem that we haven't really developed a good enough cost-efficient hydrogen production method. Because the industry or the commercialization of this technology hasn't been any economic incentive yet. So we are basically today looking at 2 technologies. This is the 100-year-old technology, alkaline electrolysis. It suffers from, it's a very good technology, a very robust technology, but it operates at low current densities. And it's difficult to scale up on a large size because you need really large plants. The polymer membranes are very good technologically. They have high current densities and rapid responses, but they need expensive catalysts such as platinum and other noble metals in their design. So they're difficult to scale up, because if you're looking at hydrogen technologies, you need to scale up to the megawatt, gigawatt scale. And then the amount of platinum that you need is quite a lot. So here, price is one of the issues. And both of these operate at room temperature. So now I'm afraid I'm going to have to go into a little science. So we're going to talk about the thermodynamics of water splitting. Because if you look at it, what you see here is basically that as we go up in temperature, when we're doing the electrolysis, we're essentially replacing electric energy demand with heat demand. This is heat. So we're supplying some of the energy that we use to split the water through heat. And heat is cheap. Believe it or not, it's very cheap. And it's usually in relation to a lot of power plant, it's basically free. It's just there. It's waste. So by going up in temperature, you can increase the electric efficiency of your system. And you can do that by using solid ceramic oxides. Here, this membrane here, yellow membrane, is a ceramic oxide. These operate at high temperatures. And this is basically an electrolysis situation where water is coming to the surface. It's reacted to form protons, which are transported through. They are, again, reacted to create hydrogen gas. This is all then driven by a solar cell, which we'll hear about later. But this also has one other advantage. And what you can see here, hydrogen is pure. Pure hydrogen is produced on this side. There's nothing else there, meaning that we can actually pressurize this tank electrochemically. So a very costly way of producing high-pressure hydrogen is actually compressing it. the compressors themselves cost a lot. Here we can do it electrochemically, which is a lot cheaper. So the theory of this is very nice. And this is a concept that we are studying at the moment in an EU project that we're coordinating called Electra. And it is an interdisciplinary project where we're doing novel materials. We're material scientists here at the Department of Chemistry. We're looking at scalable production because we want to show that this technology really can be scaled, because that's one of the more essential parts when we're trying to drive this towards a technology. And in order to show that, we are building a kilowatt-size multi-tubular module. And also we're trying to keep, as we are, even though this is in an early stage, we're really looking into modeling how this can be integrated with renewable energy sources. We're trying to see how this technology can integrate with geothermal and solar, how we can utilize the heat available, and how the techno-economics can be balanced. We have partners in Norway, France, Spain, and Iceland. And it's industry, SMEs, and research institutes all contributing in this project. So from a material science point of view, we have three main components. We have an electrode which split water, we have a membrane which transport protons, and we have an electrode which has a hydrogen evolution reaction. These two are quite well established and well known, whereas this one has been the bottleneck for a lot of years in this technology. Recently, we've developed this material, which has the highest or the fastest reported kinetics in the world. So what we're actually doing at the moment is we are trying to develop a method to upscale the production, because this was measured in a very small coin cell lab scale system, and now we're looking at how to scale that up. And that we're doing by using what we call an extruder. So we're extruding long tubes, which are then dip-coated with functional layers. So you're basically taking green tubes, dipping them in a slurry, hanging them, and then you're putting it in a furnace that has slightly higher temperatures than what you use at home. And then, with a little bit of magic that I couldn't show you, you get something like this. And also, we want to take it one step further, because the current density with an area like this is very high, so that the amount of current that we're running in this system would be too high engineering-wise. So we're looking into how to segment this in series to increase the voltage and reduce the current, because high currents is very difficult when you're trying to push, let's say, 1,000 amps. You don't want that. So you need to segment it. So that's another thing we need to do. And as I said, we want to do a multi-tube module. I can't really show you the new design. This is a first version, because the other one is under patenting, so I'm not allowed to show it. But the concept is very nice with the tubular module is that if one of these tubes break or they have a failure, they can be monitored and they can individually be replaced. Whereas in typical stacks, if you have a single cell in a stack that fails, the entire stack is gone. So now you can increase the lifetime and the durability of our modules, and hopefully also then the lifetime cost of a system would increase or decrease. And again, as I said, we're looking into how these are integrated with renewable energy sources. And here we're using end users in Spain, a company called Abengoa, and a company in Iceland called Carbon Recycling International. So they are heavily involved in how to do this. But this is just one project on hydrogen technology. I wanted to include two other projects that I found interesting from a Norwegian perspective. This is something from a summer project from DNV this summer, where they got a bunch of students to solve a question of how to reuse old oil platforms for Japan. And in Japan, they have challenges in terms of they don't have much surface area. It's basically people everywhere. But they have a lot of coastline and a lot of water. And they want to be self-sufficient in their energy situation. So what they suggested was make offshore wind, take the oil platforms, and transform them into basically energy storage platforms by using electrolyzers, which are then compressed and stored and shipped into land. and especially for Japan, which is building up their hydrogen infrastructure, this is very, very interesting. And this was done, as I said, by Veritas GL. Another thing that has gaining a lot of traction and is, from a Norwegian perspective, is very interesting, is the concept of self-supplied ships. Long, like not ferries across the fjords, but longer shipping transports that have both solar panels, wind rotors that can harvest the energy, and then you have electrolyzers that can, and batteries that can store it in terms of both batteries and hydrogen. So you have a self-supplied shipping industry, and that could be a way to combine the shipping industry in Norway and also our energy industry in Norway into the future. So these are all future projects looking into the future. Where are we today? Well, it's really becoming big business. You know, when Arnold is filling his hydrogen Hummer for the hydrogen highway in California, there are people who will listen. And a lot of the big car companies are distributing their hydrogen cars now. They have a range of 600 kilometers and a filling time of 3 minutes. And they're really investing heavily in this. So there's a lot of money being invested into the fact that hydrogen is coming. And you're seeing here the hydrogen filling stations that are distributed in the world, and it's focused in Japan, Central Europe, and in the US. And this is, of course, politically defined. So it's the countries that have a political interest that has the biggest growth in this area. And this is hydrogen filling station by Hydrogen Logic. It was recently purchased by Nel Hydrogen. I don't know if you know it, but they are the ones. They are basically what Norsk Hydro used to be in terms of hydrogen production. So they've now invested 300 million in hydrogen filling stations because they see that this is a potential market for the future. So it's really becoming a business, and it's going to grow bigger. So with that, I'd like to summarize with a quote, since I started one. And Jules Verne, again, I like him. He basically said that water will be the coal of the future. And here in Norway, maybe it can be the oil of our future, because we have the resources, we have competence, we're good in energy, we're good in water, water power, and we also have some sort of a responsibility as a big oil-producing nation the last 40 years. So with that, I'd like to thank you.
Great, thank you. Now, first, let's just welcome Marianne Moen from Norwegian Space Center up on stage, and for some reactions from the panel.
Yeah, I guess we're the ones to ask the sort of stupid questions now. And first of all, this is really, really interesting, and given that sort of we're such a high energy producing or fossil fuel production country to begin with, I'd like to ask you, sort of, you say that we have competence within energy, within water, but for us to become a leading nation within hydrogen energy, sort of what competence are we missing in Norway? Because I would assume that not everything within fossil fuel energy production translates directly into this. So where are we as a nation weak if this was to become the future of energy?
That's a very good question, but it's many aspects of the hydrogen technology. We have leading groups in terms of academic groups. But in terms of industry, there's not as much. But we have a history in Hydro for producing hydrogen. So the electrolysis operation is well known. Operation offshore, which will probably be a really big industry for hydrogen production, actually producing it offshore for offshore wind. We have a lot of expertise and knowledge. And the competence, there's a big cluster in Oslo, in more southern parts of Norway, in Trondheim, of more research groups that are very high and in the forefront of in the world in terms of academic expertise. So it's a way. But the question is, how can we transform that into something that is commercial? And then you also need someone who wants to buy it.
Yeah, just you at the end there, you were getting to the infrastructure issue. And you said that the new technology obviously is going to be better than the some 150, 200-year-old one. Yeah. But still, we're not there yet, and we have infrastructure building now. So how dependent are we on new technology for developing infrastructure? And sort of in relation to that, I mean, it was a lot of stations, but in terms of...
it's not much.
It's not much,
no.
Really, right?
No, so it's a very good question, because so it's the chicken and the egg situation. You don't have a market for hydrogen cars until you have filling stations. So no one's going to start producing hydrogen or buying hydrogen cars until you have fueling stations. But no one want to build a hydrogen station if there's no cars. So someone just has to start, and that's basically where we're at right now. 5 years ago, the car industries in Japan and the Japanese government made a decision that in 2015 there's going to be 100 stations and we're going to start selling cars. So that was basically just a decision. It was political. We know hydrogen is coming, but we need to get it started, and they want to move that way. And that's also what happened now in Central Europe and a few years ago in California. But it's based on both fossil fuel reforming, so it's not really clean, but it's there to sort of jumpstart the market. And it's also based on polymer electrolysis, but it's a little expensive. So it won't be for the consumer, but it will be through subsidies at the moment. But the price is still a little too high for it to grow, but you need sort of spread the seed to let the market find the need.
Marianne?
You sort of said it. You compete with other energy carriers. Honestly, how did you react, or what did you say in your research group last summer when the oil prices started to drop?
That's a really, well, it's that's a very good question. Depends on which hat you have on when you're answering that question. But for me, as we live in Norway, we know that that will actually mean less investments on a short-term basis, because there's less money to go around that are spent in Norway. But in terms, and it also means that but on a more larger scale, it's difficult to see how it affects us right now. But it also has sort of made people understand that this is something we can't really, they will stop pumping up the really expensive oil, and people are looking into moving, there's more interest into other energy situations in the future, is sort of the idea that I'm getting. It's sort of a wake-up for people.
Okay.
So on that optimistic note, let's give him a warm applause.